A tour of Soweto.
So what you're looking at now is a soccer city stadium. This is the biggest stadium in the country. It's a 95,000 capacity stadium. But during the World Cup, they cleared 5,000 seats right in the center on the front rows for people on wheelchair, disabled people, so that they can have their own clear place to stand. So it was a great achievement for the country to actually have the World Cup over here. And this actually is a stadium that was not completed until about 2 months before the start of the World Cup. But yes, everything was completed in time, and the event became a success. And when that gold was discovered, the gold rush began in Johannesburg, and it saw a lot of people from neighboring countries in Africa, sorry, for migrant, to become migrant laborers, and lots of other people from different other parts of the world who are seeking the fortune to be in the gold industry as well. So all that happened. And it was only in 1900 that the first group of black people was moved from Soweto, from downtown Johannesburg, to be moved to the southwestern direction. Initially, what had happened in 1900 is that the areas where everyone was settled in, was living around, had developed what was known as the bubonic plague. Now, the bubonic plague, as we all know, is a rat disease, which is quite brutal, if it's not quickly attended to. And so they actually had to destroy that slum area where everyone was living together, and to clear the area, to put up proper infrastructure after they had banned that little village. But it is actually the time when the Dutch regime at the time, decided that they would have then to clear the first group of black people to the southwestern direction, and that's what led to the development and the start of Soweto in 1900. 1910 was a year when apartheid was officiated, but I should say that prior to that year, there were lots of other policies that were being developed, that were still part of the divide and rule policies. But to make apartheid a law with lots and lots and hundreds of sets of laws, like the Group Areas Act, where they would separate groupings or natives, they would separate different races of people and ethnic groups according to their plan. In other words, they would not live together. Those laws were forming part of apartheid, but many other laws had developed before, because if you look at the beginning of mining, you would still find that it was only the black laborers mostly that you would find underground, and you would not find mostly same colors working within the same area. So they had already started encouraging or practicing the divide and rule policies, although it was not officiated until 1910. So apartheid only started in 1910, and it ended in 1948 was made a law, and it ended in 1991. But in 1910, the regime, the Dutch regime, actually became superior. It started ruling over the whole country. Prior to that, they just had their own state in Pretoria and Bloemfontein. In other words, the British were still in control, pretty much in control, until 1910, when 1910 the Dutch became the real rulers of the whole country. In other words, the Dutch they were handed over the country to them, because there were not necessarily elections or anything like that actually took place. In about a kilometer, we'll be entering Soweto, and but the first part that you are going to see is the part of Soweto that is more affluent. It's actually the part of Soweto that many people help build houses for themselves in. And here's a welcome sign on our left that says welcome to Soweto. And as usual, tourists that are visiting Soweto, we've got visitors to Soweto almost every day. It is true that Kliptown is actually the tourist destination in the country, the number one tourist destination, but it is also true that Soweto is a number one tourist attraction in the country. You'd find people who spend time in Soweto, but they would not miss coming through to Soweto. Speed cameras hiding the car there. They want to get us. So this is the what I would refer to as the more affluent part of Soweto, where the rent value is much better than any other part of Soweto. And if you look around, you'll see that the main means of building in Soweto or in Johannesburg or in South Africa in general is by use of brick. I know in other different countries people use different things and means, but here they use brick in order to build. And on our left we've got a school. It's always a question as to why do you find security fencing around schools, but there's been a lot of challenges with younger people doing drugs and others coming to school, standing outside the fence to come and sell drugs to the students in school. So it's always important to try and protect the the children that are inside school from the ones that are not inside school. And generally you would also see that we've got high walls like everywhere. We come from a very rife history of Soweto being the most dangerous township in the country. It is not true that Soweto is still dangerous. When I was born in Soweto many years ago, Soweto having so many subsections was very difficult to move from one subsection to another section because of fear of gangs and and crime. But today Soweto has become a type of a township where young white boys and girls come to Soweto just for clubbing at night by themselves. So that can be marked as a huge improvement. Soweto is now referred to as one of the safest townships because white people come to town by themselves to come clubbing, in Soweto. On the right, we've just passed one of the few, playing fields for kids. That type of infrastructure or recreational facilities were not there when I was still a young boy growing up in Soweto. But it is fortunate for kids today that they do have these facilities in order to play, So the high walls come from the history of crime, but also people, seek. There's also another reason why people seek, privacy, hiding themselves between high walls. But also it has become the feel and the look and the feel of the area. You find a person that is building a house recently who feels that the crime is not really a big major issue affecting them, but they still decide to put up high walls because of how the whole neighborhood feels like. The whole look and feel of the neighborhood.
Right, stop here for a second.
When you look to the left, you will realize that it is totally a different setting. These mass housing facilities that we see on the left were meant for mining migrant laborers. They came and settled here. The government put up these, the mining houses put up these houses for them to live in here. They were squashed inside here. One house, which is actually the two windows, would have a minimum of 12 men that lived in them. Inside these houses, there's bunks, concrete bunks on walls. Now, if you look in terms of the four partitioned or four rooms inside, in each section, what you would categorize as one room would have 6 bunks. Okay. Actually would have, the whole house would actually have 12 concrete bunks, and which was not necessarily the easiest way of living, sleeping on concrete on walls. But it was meant for migrant laborers to live in their conditions. And the one sad part is that they were not allowed to bring their families to live with them in them. So you had people stuck inside here, worked in the mines, didn't have their families with, and there would be minimum of 18 months contracts that they would actually spend in the mines. So they ended up not seeing their families for almost 2 years. And one of the biggest tendencies is that a lot of men never went back home to their rural families that had left. And when you look at the old movies, you'd see they were about women who went to Johannesburg to come and look for their husbands. It was a common occurrence. So a lot of men then started their other families here in Soweto, and a lot of other men also started engaging in homosexual activity, which was as a result of this setting of community, which destabilized the family lifestyle. Now, you will see that on the left-hand side and on the right-hand side, there's been new houses that have been built for them. These are the new infrastructures by the government to correct the, this houses have all the infrastructure. Remember, these are free houses that the government builds for people. And more than being free, they also for each family has got their own house with running water, sanitation, everything inside, electricity. They pay for electricity usage, and they get 6,000 liters of free waters every month. Every poorer community gets 6,000 liters of free water every month in their household. From the left. So you can see the houses on the left hand side, like the brown colored houses. These are all the new houses that the government is now building for people in Soweto. The free houses, in order to try and correct the past challenges, and you can see they're quite nice houses. I would love to receive a free house like that. Government is still responsible of cleaning up, but as you can see, actually, as much as you can see, there's a bit of litter there and then. So it is practically one of the cleanest areas you can see around, because government is responsible for cleaning. In fact, all the townships and communities, government is responsible for cleaning. Looking across the freeway, the walls, all the walls that we see on the left, that is the Baragwanath Hospital. Now, from where we are towards the end of these walls, it's going to be about 1.3 kilometers, almost a mile. Now, that is what is known as the Baragwanath Hospital, everything inside. Now, this is known to be the biggest hospital in the world. Okay. Yeah. That's the biggest hospital in the world. I wanted to make a turn there, but I realized that I would need to go inside. So all these walls that you are seeing from the left, this is all part of the Baragwanath Hospital, well, at least the camera can view them. Now let me tell you more about Baragwanath. It started during the Second World War. Still, we still had an influence of the British. Remember, as a former colony, and because the British were part of the war and very close to South Africa, we are neighboring Namibia, which was a German colony. They needed to protect South Africa from different strategic angles, and they had a military base just on the other side of this hospital. And before it was a hospital, it was a land that was owned by a British Scandinavian migrant who actually used it as a motel. So they bought it from him and they built a military hospital in 1941. At the end of the Second World War, it was actually turned into a public hospital in 1948, the same year when apartheid was made a law. We're still passing the hospital, the white and the colored walls on the left, that's still part of the hospital. See the ball, the red and white ball? That's part. It's in the shopping mall, the new shopping mall. It's just another tourist initiative of viewing the city from the aerial view. Okay, I'll just quickly turn around just to get a view of this area. This is one of the informal settlements. Now remember, in South Africa, the constitution says people need to get houses. Anyone that cannot have a house, cannot build a house by themselves, the government must build them a house. So this is actually, now that has actually led to a situation where there's a lot of people that leave where they stay, and they protest perhaps, or they moved to settle or occupy land illegally. I know that many countries apply this law differently, but in South Africa, if you've settled in a place illegally, whoever moves you from that area must take you to an alternative proper housing facility, which creates quite a lot of deadlock of people that are being settled here, that settled in a place like that, and the government having to move them. They need to create alternative housing for them. Now, this is 20,000 families that came to settle here illegally, and government has got a backlog of trying to house these people until every one of them have actually been moved into a proper housing facility. And government has to now run behind these people to try and put toilets for them, try to put electricity, but also try and do it in terms of a humane way, because recently there's been an outbreak of people protesting that the certain government officials that put up toilets for them but did not cover them with walls. So there's a lot of things and that are taking place. The biggest challenge as well in terms of housing people from these informal settlements is that you also find people from some illegal foreigners coming from other countries who settled in South Africa, and government has now finds themselves having to house people, and the backlog just continues because some of the people that are being housed, they also try and sell or rent out the new houses that they actually got for free from government. Now, these are the cooling towers that were for electricity generating facility, hydro and coal facility that was used some years ago. And it is actually now being used for bungee jumping. There's a nice restaurant down there, and there's also a bungee jumping that is actually being used for. Let's see if we can get... Okay, just put it up quickly. It's way too far. So that is a bungee jumping facility that is... they actually painted these cooling towers, and because it was no longer used for electricity, they use it for bungee jumping. There's also something else that they refer to where people dive inside one of these towers inside.
Is that water in there or?
No, there's nothing. Remember, there's a dam, there's a small lake next to this facility over there. So these are the remaining remnants of the mining, the cooling facility, the electricity generating facilities. Interesting. Some community meeting there. Maybe it's for the shack dwellers. What has been happening recently is that there's been a lot of protests from people that are living in the shacks, because they're also putting now pressure on government to create facilities for them, housing facilities for them, and to improve their communities. And actually those protests are referred to as what's the name again? I'll tell you the name just now. Service delivery protests. All of these protests are referred to as service delivery. Sometimes you find that what they are really fighting about is not necessarily about service delivery. Some communities, you find that there's been service delivery in their communities, but they still, protest about service delivery. Here's a little lake that they actually used for the electricity. What is fascinating about this township is that it's one of the townships that has got the most well-developed infrastructure compared to many other townships, black townships in South Africa. In fact, this is the first township that was known to have tarred roads. It was the first township to have its radio and television stations. It's the first township that ever had the Formula One rally taking place in Soweto. Of course, on a smaller scale, but it took place here in Soweto. It's the first township that had its own or the local university, part of the bigger university in town. And it's the biggest township in this country. Remember, when we talk about population, we've got 49 people living in South Africa. Out of the 49 people, we've got 9 regions. The smallest region in this country is Johannesburg, the Greater Johannesburg, or the Gauteng region. And out of this smallest region, the population of the Greater Johannesburg or the Gauteng region is 9 million. Now, 1/3 of this 9 million lives here in Soweto, which makes it the biggest township in this country. And of course, the same reasoning is because of people seeking opportunities, for work. Migrant laborers that came to look for work in Johannesburg. It's church time. There's one of these American charismatic churches that get so full. All these cars parked here. They park all the way towards the church that you see over there, that building that's written Grace Bible Church. It's all the people that have come to that church. And the taxi is waiting for people that do not have cars that come from that church. You can see all the way. This is one of the most vibrant communities, because other than the political influence that it had, it actually shaped the future, or the direction that the South African, politics took. And we'll talk more about that influence and the politics a bit later stage. On the right-hand side, that's one of the world-class shopping malls that was built in Soweto. It's about a year old. It's got everything that you can imagine in a shopping mall, including movies, banks, retail, and everything like that. If you look at the house, you see the house with the red door, the unpainted house. That's exactly how the houses were painted. That's exactly how these houses were actually built. These were the first houses that were built for people in Soweto, with asbestos, roofing. Well, it's very true that people in South Africa, and especially in Soweto, attach a car to a status symbol. Young boys want to see them in German cars, all of them German cars, top range German cars. That is a gym. Yeah, on the right hand side. And on the other side, these are the houses that are being built, the 3 houses that are being built by the government for people. These buses that you see on the right hand side and the bus rail, this is a new infrastructure. This is in addition to the already other existing bus systems. We've got other 2 bus metro systems. This was an addition to try and alleviate or improve the infrastructure, the transport infrastructure. Yes, these are bus stations. People wait inside. When the bus comes, the glass sliding doors open for people to go in. And the most interesting thing is that each time they build something, it needs to be to accommodate disabled people as well in any infrastructure, whether it's transport infrastructure or any other, which is very, very, very impressive initiative that the government took. Paintings of Mandela everywhere on the walls, an icon, a world leader, respected in the community. But the world thinks Mandela is the only leader. Now, you see there's a lot of cars that are parked next to this church. This is a Regina Mundi church. This is a church that was actually very instrumental during the apartheid days. It's a Catholic cathedral that was actually built in 1962 by the Catholic. And the purpose was to, of course, extend their mission within the African and local communities, like what the Romans have been doing throughout the whole world. But it actually played a very important or pivotal role during the struggle for liberation in this country, because when people were imprisoned, or when political prisoners were imprisoned, and when political parties were banned, this church served as a safe haven when people were running away from the police, but also, people used this church as a safe haven when they actually held their political gatherings on a false pretense of having a church service. So, unfortunately, although it's a huge church that can actually accommodate 2,000 people seated, when people had their political gatherings, it is estimated that there would be about 4,000 people squashed inside the church. Others would be standing still, in the passages and corridors. So this uniformity of sitting down like a church service was not there. But unfortunately then, a lot of people within the very same black community would spy for the police, and they would tell the police that, people are not having a church service, but they are having a political gathering. Hence, on many occasions, police would come. On one occasion, the police came and they went inside the church and they started firing live rounds of bullets inside the church. And many people died inside and outside the church, because those who actually died inside the church was not actually because of being shot dead, but imagine 4,000 people trying to get out of the church. Many people actually were squashed, their limbs squashed, got disabled from those incidents. Others died out of shock and stampede. Those who managed to get inside the church were also shot at outside the church. You can imagine firing live rounds, but also firing, these canisters, this gas canister inside the church. There's still, bullet holes on the rooftops of these churches. And the church is not fixing them as the means of reminding people of what took place in this church. Well, it's winter now, so even our parks are not green. But this is one of the areas where people come, especially in summer, to settle on Sundays. There's a very interesting culture in Soweto of barbecues, what we call braai, coming from the word that is used mostly by the Dutch, which has become part of their culture, of braaiing, of having a boerewors or a sausage barbecue. Very nice park. There's a stream from a river, bigger river that runs through it. There's a little lake on the other side, and it is well kept, well cleaned all the time. Well, I was hoping that I was going to see a little bit one of the maybe two pieces of paper, so that you don't think that they prepared it for you. So to put up an infrastructure for people has been very big, especially for kids. Playing fields for kids has been very big. They are very lucky, because I was born in this township, and at my time growing up here, we didn't have this. You had to make means with the bricks. The car speeding, racing with the bricks. And there's this, look at how clean the lake is. Now, this is what I grew up seeing all the time. This horse trailing, which is used to sell coal. There's people that still that still kept the coal stoves. So these horses would be selling coal from the coal yards to the communities here. look at the houses on the right and on the left, these are concrete walled and concrete roofed houses. These are the houses where the soldiers, black soldiers, as members of the community of Soweto lived. Well, it is said that the rooftops and the roof-walled houses were meant that the soldiers must be, like bullet-proofed and hand grenade-proof type of houses. The challenge now is that when people want to renovate or modify these houses, it is so difficult because you can't put it aside. It's not actually one house. It's 3 families within that block of house. You can still see these houses on the left hand side. You can see that it's not one family. So it's difficult because for you to extend the house, to make it bigger, maybe if you've got a bigger family, you would have to make an addition by brick on next to it because you can't break down the house. You'd practically need a whole big bulldozer to put down the house, which will actually break up the whole house for your neighbors as well. Yeah, it's a metro center. It's a blood testing center, alcohol evidence center. Found suspicious if there's a suspicion that you are drinking and driving, they test your blood and all that. We're now going to go past the house where Winnie Mandela lives. Winnie Mandela, remember, is the former wife of Mandela. Mandela is now married to a third woman, the woman who's now known to be the only woman in the world who got married to presidents twice. She must be an expert. As we turn to the left, straight ahead, the house, the huge house with high walls, with a lot of flags, that's the house in which Winnie Mandela lives. Winnie Mandela, the former wife of Mandela, the second wife of Mandela. Remember, Mandela married twice. Firstly to Evelyn, who was known to be a woman, a Christian, who never really liked politics, probably never liking the trouble that Mandela was causing. And Mandela, that woman passed away. Mandela got married to Winnie Mandela, who was a highly active woman in politics, who is still known as the mother of the nation because of her involvement in politics. Unfortunately, they divorced with Mandela. So the house on the right hand side now is a house that belongs to Mandela. This is the house in which Mandela lived in before he became a president. This house over here. Before he became a president, he lived in this house, and then he actually later, went to Robben Island, and after Robben Island, he came back to live in this house. And then, unfortunately, coming to stay in this house after Robben Island, he only managed to stay 11 days. Reason being that the media had practically camped outside his house. And it was until one of the businessmen took him to, his house and used it as a guest house. And that house has now become the most expensive hotel in Johannesburg, the Saxon. It started as a house that actually housed Mandela first. So this is Mandela House. This is what people come here to Soweto to come and visit mostly, to see the house that he stayed in. It is still kept the way it was initially when he lived in. It has not been modified. Still looks the same. They just put up the walls outside and that gate there in order to control people that are coming in for payment and things like that.
Yes, the poster there saying to hell with Africans.
Yes, the poster says to hell with Africans because that was the whole struggle of 1976, to say that we don't want to study in Afrikaans because Afrikaans was known as a language, was seen as a language of the oppressor, and also a language that you wouldn't use anywhere else in the world. But remember, the type of education that was given to blacks by then was an inferior type of education that limited blacks, from competing effectively within the market.
White students of the University of the Witwatersrand staged a demonstration in sympathy with the Africans in Soweto and against what they regarded as police violence. The students were joined by groups of city Africans as they marched through central Johannesburg. Some of the demonstrators were attacked and running fights broke out. Several students were injured and a number were held for questioning. The police denied that their men had used their batons on the students. The demonstrators scattered when the violence erupted. But later, a student leader told them that it had been agreed with the police that having made their demonstration of support for Soweto, they should now disperse.
What we are seeing across those walls, that's a student memorial. It's a memorial that honors the involvement of youth in the struggle. So the museum itself depicts the occurrences, the killings, the burnings, and things that actually took place. The museum actually shows in pictures and written content of what we've been talking about. Basically, the involvement of students in Soweto, in politics. So this museum talks about the history of June 1976. Basically, when you get into the museum, the first video that you see is an aerial view of the mapping of Soweto when they decided to bring people in Soweto and they were kept in camps or in tents, like military tents that were given to people to live in. And secondly, what you see is when 4 years later the government decided to create a map of how the houses would look like, the first structure of houses, and further continues to show you the student uprisings of 1976 to say that this is the life that was lived in the white communities. And it shows a video of a typical day within a white family, playing of tennis, shoppings and things like this, and the life that was lived in the black township, which was totally different because of the class system. The museum continues to show you in 1976 when the students were marching peacefully, in terms of the pictures that were taken, and when the first shooting took place, and the picture of Hector Peterson being carried. And then what it further depicts is the lots and lots of bodies of people that were found lying down dead because of the police that decided to have an iron fist approach to the rioters. In fact, it is estimated that after the shooting of Hector Peterson in 1976, 16th of June, on that day, there were further almost 500 students that were shot at and died at the hands of the police within that year. Which is what led to a lot of young people of my current age and younger leaving Soweto, and they're going on exile. So that's the reason why we've got so much of the history that lies in Zambia, in Lusaka, because after that incident, a lot of people, because they realize that we are being killed in our own country, we are not safe in our own country. Because you know what police would do? They would just drive into Soweto and start shooting at students randomly. Because in the eyes of the apartheid regime, of the state police, people of my age were referred to or regarded as terrorists. Okay, so they would shoot at us as being terrorists. So that is what the museum depicts. in the country. And it was actually the students in 1976 that had actually started, revitalizing the struggle. So that's a reason why the 1976 student uprising is so important, and that's a reason why Soweto is so important, because Soweto actually influenced the beginning of the hype of the struggle and influenced the direction. Because since 1976 towards even the 1990, 1991, when the announcement of the end of apartheid took place and the announcement of the release of political prisoners took place, throughout all those years you would see continuous protests, although there were a lot of other young people that left the country, because police would have a list of who they were told in the township, this is the influential person, or these are the political activists. Police would have a list, and on that list they would start to eliminate people or kill people according to that list. Okay, and there was a lot of spying that took place coming from the very young people that lived in Soweto. You'd find that I am caught by police, and when they terrorize me by electric shocking or whatever means, and start talking, I would start crying like a baby and start talking of what is happening. And there was a list that emanated from that. And because of the slowness of the progress that we wanted and that political activists wanted, Winnie Mandela actually, although Winnie is known to the media as been corrupt and things like that, actually Winnie was the one woman that withstood the test of time by influencing the struggle when a lot of other people were quiet, when a lot of men were quiet. And she even issued an instruction that all those that were found to be spying against the struggle, against the movements of struggle, those should be necklaced. Necklaced being a local term to put a burning tire, or to put a tire, a car tire, and put fuel and burn it alive. Within those times, as an activist myself, but my term was around from 85 to 90. That's when I was active, because that's when I was in high school. I started high school in 1985. I was doing standard 5 in 85. So that age group, you'd automatically be part of the struggle. You did not necessarily need to study for that. You would see how your parents would be humiliated, how your father would be humiliated in front of you by the police, or degraded in front of you. That automatically aggravated anger in you, and you automatically wanted to form part of the struggle to change the course of this country. As a black person, you were not allowed into town in the 60s, 40s, earlier, in all those years. Walking in the pavement in town would equate to treason as a black person, and you would be imprisoned because of that. So that setting in the country is what this museum is all about, and depicts also the history of the student leaders by then. For example, Hector Peterson was not a student leader. Hector Peterson was a student among the other students that were marching, and he was shot at by the police. That's what brought him to the forefront in terms of the fame. And the man that tried to save his life by carrying him to hospital to try and save his life, his name was Makubo. And Makubo, that's his surname actually, was just a passerby, also not a student leader, but a passerby who saw what happened and tried to save the life of this boy. And because of his actions, he was, police wanted to kill him, because within the community he was regarded as a hero, and but the police regarded him as a terrorist as well. Then he left the country and went to Botswana, crossed the border to Botswana to try and save his life there. Started having a family there, but in the 80s, South Africa started what was referred to as a cross-border raids and started attacking neighboring countries. Remember, they even tried to attack the camp in Lusaka, and the reason being that because they felt this country was harboring the terrorists.